right, good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here tonight. My name is Ryan Erpaski. I'm the Interim Director of Programming here at the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center. We are extremely excited to present tonight's program, Critical Race Theory and the Search for Truth. We have a very special guest with us this evening, Professor of Global and Intercultural Studies at Miami University, Dr. Rodney Coates. Tonight, Dr. Coates will demonstrate the power and usefulness of critical race theory by examining our storied past to better understand our present. Using excerpts from his recent book, Critical Race Theory and the Search for Truth, Dr. Coates presents critical race theory as a counternarrative to racialized stories that silence and diminish people of color and perpetuate what educator W.E.B. Du Bois called history as propaganda. We do have Dr. Coates' book available for purchase this evening, and following the presentation, there will be opportunities for questions as well as book signings. We are in for quite the educational evening, so without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Rodney Coates.
Wow. First of all, I'd like to thank the Freedom Center for inviting me. This night is special in that 4 different pieces of my life comes together. My church members, my school members, employees, my fraternity, and family. And I see a student out there too. I'd like to thank you for honoring me by simply being here. Where do I begin? I've got notes. I've got 44 pages of notes, just in case I forget what I'm going to do. But where we're going to start is that this project started in 2019. It started right after New York Times issued its 1619 project. Donald Trump was the president at that time, and he immediately began canceling all DE&I programs in the federal government. And he also started insisting on something called the 1776 project. I'm trying to figure out these things here, and I came across W.E.B. Du Bois. Du Bois, in The Souls of Black Folks, says something to the extent of, to be black in America, one forever feels their two-ness. To be black and an American, 2 unreconcilable spirits in one dark body. As I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking 1619, 1776, 1619, 1776. 2 stories, unreconcilable stories in one country. Which one is true? They both are. They both are. And then I began thinking, what does this 1776 project do? It represents America from the positionality of the European. And all of us have gone through schools, speaker, shut up. All of us have gone through schools that prides itself in terms of, in 1492, Columbus sailed the blue and discovered America. Another story would be that in the fateful day in October in 1492, a group of Arawakian natives discovered Christopher Columbus hopelessly lost. They're the same story. We both presume that they're both true. It's strange that all of us know the first one and we don't know the second one. And so as I'm thinking about this thing called critical race theory, I'm thinking about what would happen if we looked at this country and its history from the vantage point of the other. I remember when my son, who's now like 6 feet tall, was a toddler, reading this Psychology Today thing. You know, we're modern parents. We're always reading stuff about parenting. You know, our parents didn't read a darn thing about parenting, yet they raised us, okay? How they did it, I don't know, okay? But anyway, and it said that in order to child-proof my home, I should get down on my hands and knees and crawl around. I'm sitting there saying, that sounds pretty daggone crazy. Why would I do something strange like that? But what the heck? I got down on my hands and knees and started crawling around, and true enough, I started seeing things totally differently than I did standing up. I started seeing all kinds of dangers, the plugs and the drapes and everything that a 2-year-old kid would just love to pull down on themselves. Positionality is everything. And so it dawned upon me, what would happen if we looked at this story from different positions? Okay, let me get started. To date, over 1 million Ukrainians and Russians have been killed and wounded in what can only be called the egomaniacal desires of an autocrat. As a paranoid dictator, Vladimir Putin joins not only his predecessors, Joseph Stalin, but a host of others, including Hitler and Idi Amin and Papadoc and Ferdinand Marcos. And like these other dictators, Putin has no concern for what happens when he leaves the scene. Putin exhibits a nihilistic indifference to the consequences of his actions. The truth is, this war will serve no sane reasons except to inflate his ego. These same truths are part of and parcel of the history and reality of racial imperialism across time. What does that mean? If we look at this from the vantage point of the Europeans discovered the Africans. They had no existence before then. If we listen to the Europeans, they discovered the African and brought them as slaves. They had no history before that. If we look at history, women had no voice until the 1920s. If we look at history, blacks appear as slaves, then they appear in the Civil War, then they appear in the Great Migration, then they appear in the Civil Rights Movement, then Barack Obama, and then 20 years later, Kamala Harris. Always a problem. W.E.B. Du Bois asked the question, what is it like to be a problem? To enter into this space called America as a problem. The African came to this country and they were labeled a color, not a people. They were a problem. You turn on the news and all you see is the problem. W. Bois would say that if you internalize this image of you as a problem, then you will be angry and stressed. You will be broken down. You will be butchered. What happens when you internalize these images of you, then you lose your sense of self. You lose your purpose for existence. And you lose any reason for being. And that is the dilemma that critical race theorists are attempting to deal with. All of those images we just spoke of reflect the objectification of blacks. There is no agency in that. They are simply reacting to the system and structure and racism, and they are victims writ large. There's a problem with that, if that's all you are is reactionary. But I wonder, is that indeed the case? I know for a fact that as the Europeans discovered Africa, Africa had long before had discovered them. So let me get started. First of all, there's a whole bunch of confusion about critical race theory. So let me first deal with what critical race theory is not, according to its detractors. So often when we speak of race in this country and racial hierarchies, we do it in the most simplistic of terms, in the most simplistic of ways. We take the most complicated structures that we've ever created, and yes, we created race and racial hierarchies, but we attempt to make them simple. Let me give you an example, and all of you all have heard these terms: white privilege, white guilt, white fragility. It assumes that all whites are privileged. It assumes that all whites are fragile. It assumes that all whites are guilty. There's a deep problem with that. Any term that applies to every member of that group is by definition either a stereotype, a lie, or a myth. Let's talk about this particular myth. Where did it start? There's something known as Bacon's Rebellion. It took place in 1688 in Virginia. This is where a group of Irish and English and black indentured servants banded together and shut down Virginia. They had a revolution. It scared my president's here. It scared the crap out of them. I told him that I would not curse. I didn't tell him I wouldn't cuss. And some of you all are looking at me strangely. He knows where I'm going with this. You see, when you curse, you condemn someone to hell and back, but when you cuss, you use creative language. So what the hell? Greg. What's interesting is that the white planter elite white males, were scared crapless. And they did something quite novel. They convinced the English and the Irish indentured servants that they were white and that they had privilege. Isn't that amazing? They didn't have privilege before that point. They were indentured servants. They were at the lowest end of the totem pole along with those Africans. They were treated the same, they acted the same, so forth and so on. But in order to co-opt them, the white planter elite convinced them that they were white and they had privilege. In the process, they also created slavery. And they created this racial hierarchy and the myth of whiteness and white privilege. Follow me now. Every time elite white males have been challenged in this country, what have they done? They organize poor whites to defend whiteness. They organize poor whites to be their frontline troops. They convince them that they are about to lose their privileges, that these colored people are rising up against them to take their privilege. And so therefore these poor whites, now militarized, target people of color. This happened, by the way, shortly after the Civil War. Oh, let me back up for a minute. The Civil War. How did we get there? You have to go back to another place. You have to go to a place called Haiti. The Haitians, the first successful slave rebellion in this hemisphere. You might wonder what made them so successful in that slave rebellion. Well, see, the white planter elite screwed up. They brought a whole bunch of military trained women and men to guard and to keep the slaves in their place. What do you think those militarily trained veterans of war did in Haiti? They organized all of the African enslaved people, and they rebelled. They had a revolution. It scared the crap out of the white planter elite. So much so that Napoleon, you know what he did, don't you? He said, we can't control this. And so therefore, the United States of America got the largest block of land that it had ever gotten, known as the Louisiana Purchase, as a consequence of this slave rebellion. By the way, you notice that these Europeans are reacting and responding to Africans and African agency, okay? As opposed to the Africans reacting and responding to the agency of the Europeans. Follow me here. There were 100 different slave rebellions following that in the Americas. None of them were successful. That wasn't the point. The point was it kept the white planter elite constantly on edge. Constantly on edge. It jacked up the price of controlling these Africans because they were not complacent. Oh. And so what? The Confederates decided that the only way that they could secure their borders, that sound familiar? The only way that they could secure their enslaved was to separate from the Union because of the fear of these enslaved people. What is amazing, Abraham Lincoln, you all know him as the great emancipator. Well, that's the European version of this. Abraham Lincoln says the following: I'm not really concerned about the slave. If I've got to free them all, then I will. If I got to keep them all enslaved, then that I will. If I got to free some and let some go, keep going as slaves, then that I will. Guess what he did? He freed some and he kept some enslaved. But you got to ask yourself the question, which ones did he free? Only the ones that he had no control over. Only the ones in the Confederate States. Why would he do that? For one reason. He wanted them to rebel. And that was the biggest fear of the Confederates, that all of these slaves would rebel in the midst of this war. And so therefore they never committed all of their troops, all of their person power, for fear of these Africans rebelling. And they caused a bunch of crap, okay? And consequently, they lost that war. What's strange is that we entered into this period called Reconstruction, where these formerly enslaved, now free people. Oh, I got to tell another story. Y'all mind if I tell the story? I like stories. Have you ever wondered why Davy Crockett and Daniel Boone were at the Alamo? In Texas, Kentucky frontiersmen. What the hell are they doing in Texas? They got displaced by slaves. They could not, poor whites could not compete with slave labor. And so they did what? They went south. Go west, young man. And they settled in this place called Texas, owned by, controlled by Mexico. Now, what do you think these Kentucky frontiersmen did once they got to Texas? They decided that they wanted to import slavery, which had been outlawed by the Mexican government at that point. And so therefore, they rebelled against and wanted to succeed, set up their own state. And a war ensued. And they got killed at the Alamo. You would think that that would be the end of the story, but it wasn't. Because the US government then sent massive number of troops there. And we fought the Mexican-United States war to secure slavery in the state of Texas. We won that war. We acquired Texas. And Texas became the last slave state in the Union. I mention that because some of you are aware of Juneteenth. The last group of Africans to find out that they were free, coincidentally, happened to be in the last state that became a slave state. That would have been Texas. Moving on along. So during this period of Reconstruction, over 100 black towns were created across this country, particularly in the South and Southwest. Africans were enjoying their freedom and enjoying what it means to be free. You know, give me your poor, your tired, your huddled masses yearning to be free. And they built towns in Tulsa, Oklahoma, Roswell, Florida, several other places. And you would think that we good Americans would celebrate this ingenuity, this creativity. this drive for freedom. Quite the contrary. Poor whites were whipped up again into a fiery furnace. And many of those towns were attacked and burnt to the ground. Black Wall Street was destroyed. And while you're thinking, oh, that was in the South, no. Right here in good old Cincinnati, there were 3 separate race riots targeting the black community, the last of which forced all the blacks out of Cincinnati, and they settled in a place called Lincoln Heights, which still exists today. Then lynching takes place. Wasn't enough to take people's lands and destroy their homes, but that was okay because blacks again used their agency and left the South in droves. Let me speed ahead. It's 7:30. I'm told that I'm supposed to chill out in a bit. Blacks then used their agency to leave the South in great numbers. They built towns and cities throughout the Midwest and North. How did the white elite power structure respond to that? With redlining. Redlining. You all know what that is. We still have the wealth gaps, racial wealth gaps associated with that. Then what? Blacks were still successful. They go into World War I, World War II, we get the civil rights movement, and blacks are quite successful. Black women started making massive gains in this country. And then what happens? Reagan gets elected, and he starts talking about a Southern strategy that will once again put blacks back in their place. I got you. I'm going to take 5 more minutes. And then what happens under Reagan? Reagan, by the way, who was the first to coin the phrase, make America white again. I'm sorry, make America great again. We started the cradle to prison pipeline. We started defunding education as whites fled the cities that blacks occupied. And we see viable communities become ghettos. I come out of one of those communities called East St. Louis. And then 1981, Project 2025 began in earnest. Blacks, by the way, survived that. And once again, we're moving on up. Barack Obama becomes president of the United States. Unemployment gets at its lowest ebb. More blacks are in college graduating. Get a whole generation of talented tenth. What happens? Make America great again happens. What happens is that many people would look at the failure of blacks. That has not been the case. The case has been every time blacks have asserted themselves, acted, moved themselves, pushed themselves, what happens is that we have a movement to push poor whites into the forefront. By the way, now it's called white replacement theory. The fact that in 2060, 50, 60, this country is going to be majority people of color. That's what this whole moment is about. That's why we have abortion. No longer. It's not about black women having more babies. It's about white women having more babies. That's why we have this concern about the border. All these brown people coming into this country and Haitians. Oh, I got 5 more minutes. Good. What did we do to the Haitians? On 3 separate occasions, the United States of America invaded Haiti and instituted a puppet regime. We forced the Haitians to pay over $60 billion in reparations. Oh, and guess who got paid reparations after slavery? Not the African indentured servant and enslaved person, but the white planter elite. So here we are. Martin Luther King said he had a dream in the midst of one of the most vicious periods of time in this country's history. Jim Crow was running rampant. Blacks were being terrorized. Black churches were being bombed. And he articulated a dream. That's what we need right now, is another dream and another dreamer. Why is CRT under attack? Why have we banned over 4,000 books? Why have 28 states passed laws to keep me from writing my book, teaching my courses, even having this conversation? Don't you find it strange? I'm a Vietnam veteran, by the way. Trump spent 6 times avoiding going into the war. I thought I'd throw that out there. A dream right now. Let me share something with you. On an African temple, you find the following: know thyself. What is CRT all about? But learning about yourself, your agency, not as an object, not as a reactionary force, but as a subject in your own story, where you have agency. What do you want to do? You want to make sure your children are reading and writing and learning about their history, not a history written by Europeans, but written by blacks. Women, you want to make sure that your daughters know that they're more than just a brood hen, that they are smart and resilient and strong. Right now, black boys are killing themselves at a tremendous rate for one reason: they don't know who they are. They don't know where they've come from. We have too many black churches opening up every day that's only concerned with building a bigger building. And they're surrounded by children that are dying. We have fraternities and sororities that are concerned with throwing another party, another boule, while kids are starving for knowledge. We have to take control, and that control starts with us using our positionality to save our children and help them to dream and show them the way. Using our positions at institutions to make sure those doors are open. Challenging our schools to stop failing our kids. The easiest thing I can do, Greg, is to flunk a kid. That's easy. You know what the hardest thing to do? Challenge them to learn and to love learning. If you've got someone who is in education that is not doing that, then they need to be fired. You need to hold our teachers accountable. No longer should we have schools failing our kids. Last thing, I will shut up. At Miami University, 10 years ago, they wanted this football player to take my course. I did something that I don't think any professor at Miami had ever done. I said, hell no, not gonna happen. The coach said, I beg your pardon. Why not? I said, because he's not going to be successful. He's going to fail. And they said, why do you say that? I said, you start him in the morning working out. Then after 2 or 3 hours, you send him to class. Then you get him out of class and you send him to practice field. And then after practice, you expect for him now, exhausted, to study. That's a recipe for failure. We are failing him. They said, what do you want to do? I said, the only way this kid will get in my class if you guarantee, one, that 2 hours before my class, he's not doing anything but taking notes in his readings. 2, you'll make sure he comes to my class and take notes in class. 3, after class, he is going to now do some more studying. 4, after he's done that, then you can work him out and do whatever you need to do. And if by midterm this kid falls below a B, you will yank him from all athletic activities. And you will inform him that if he cannot be a student, he cannot be an athlete at Miami University. They said, okay. The kid made a B plus. That fall, for the first time in his life, he made the dean's list. Okay, problem solved. A couple years later, I ran into the coach. Hey, how's our guy doing? Oh, he stopped going to class. He failed. He did this. He wound up flunking out. And I said, that's bullshit. Bull friggin' shit. And I talked to our athletic director and the coach, and we put together a summer bridge program where all the football players that come into Miami goes through this course, structured the way I just said. And in the 10 years, guess what's happened to the GPA for football players at Miami University? It has gone up every year. Guess what's happened to the graduation rate of football players? It has gone up every year. Again, it's easy to fail someone. Oh, I got the Mac Award, Professor of the Year for that. That's what critical race theory is about. It's about empowerment. It's about dreams. And it's about facilitating individuals to become agents in their own life story. Questions?
Thank you for talking about Haiti. You wrote a whole chapter in the book on Haiti and the creation of the racial state. And you talked a little bit about tonight, but my question to you is, when you look at the history of Haiti, all that happened, you talked about one of the worst slave rebellions in the successful. My question to you is, when you look at all that has recently happened in Haiti, what, if anything, has come out of Haiti that's good? And what is your prescription as a critical race theorist for how that situation can turn better? Because as you have talked about, it is a horrible testimony to what we, particularly as this country, oversaw and contributed to. So if you can briefly talk more about this country's involvement in that, but more importantly, where do we go from here in Haiti, the worst poverty in this hemisphere?
A couple of things here. One, as I indicated, we invaded Haiti on 4 separate occasions. We put dictators in charge. We put thugs and killers in charge. We put the gang leaders in charge. We did that 4 separate occasions. Okay, why did we do that? Because we were afraid of this black nation. Okay, we did, by the way, the same thing throughout Latin America. We invaded it, put in puppet regimes. Okay, what do we do? By the way, right now, Haiti sits on an island. The other side of that island is the Dominican Republic. What's interesting is we've invested in the Dominican Republic for the last 60, 70 years. The World Bank invests in the Dominican Republic. Haiti used to be the jewel of the, of the Caribbean. It was one of the most prosperous areas, period, in the Caribbean. We created a failed state on one side of the island and a very affluent on the other. And for the last 20 or 30 years, we've been giving them welfare. We've been giving them aid. The other side of the island, we're giving them developmental monies. I come out of East St. Louis. Guess what you can't do with aid? Aid does not get you out from welfare. No one that I've ever known has ever gotten out of poverty because of aid. What will happen? What will work? Industrial development. I believe in capitalism. I believe in a free market. Good. Let's create some industries there. What kind of industries? They can do assembly, okay? They can do all kinds of things, okay? You name it, it can be done, all right? And by the way, same thing in Latin America. We've got this immigration crisis. Why? Because people are leaving abject poverty. I ask my students one question. If you're starving to death, if people are shooting at your mama and your daddy, what will you do? I ask you the same thing. Would you stay there? You got nothing to eat. You got no hope. You got no future. What will you do? Look at something called remittances. Several billions of dollars every year go to Mexico, go to Haiti, go to Latin America, Brazil, from the United States. They're sons and daughters that come here. And what do they come here for? Springfield will let you know. Where you've got 10, 15,000 Haitians that are doing what? Working. Springfield mayor says that these industrious individuals that came here through the border are responsible for Springfield undergoing its most massive industrial development it has occurred in the last 50 years. All these people want to do is to work. Give me your poor, your tired, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. What do they want? They want to breathe free. You cannot be free if you don't have agency. Questions?
Good doctor. It's always a delight to have you escort us through history and telling us what critical race theory is and what it isn't. Yet I got challenged today when you talked about the importance of teachers and their commitment to bringing our kids forward. Can you just speak to this equal importance about parents and the village, their role in bringing our kids forward to participate?
First of all, it takes a village to raise a child. It's not just parents, but the whole community, okay? Working together. I remember as this 12-year-old kid leaving my parents' house, going to school. I'm doing what some of you all might have done. I've got a cigarette in my mouth and I get home. My dad tells me, because they'd been at work, I understand that you walked out of here smoking a cigarette this morning. I said, I beg your pardon? Oh, you ain't got to try to lie. Miss Mary across the street, 65-year-old retired grandmother, Miss Mary, who used to babysit me, informed him. So you know what my dad said? Well, if you're going to smoke cigarettes, you're going to drink too. No problem. Here. He pulled out a bottle of Old Granddad and a cigar. Had me puffing on the cigar. Swallow it. Okay. Now drink this. Don't sip it. Drink it like a man. After I threw up, I don't know how many times, I was 25 years old before I put anything up to my lips, booze or cigarettes. But it takes a community working together. It takes the teachers. It takes the church. I learned how to read in church. I learned how to read and speak in church. I taught Sunday school. And it takes the neighborhood. I remember the junkie on the street corner. I'm meandering. He said, boy, you better get your ass to school. You do not want to be on this corner. I catch you on this corner again, I'm going to kick your ass. Period. Yes, Mr. Jim, I knew who he was. He was a junkie on the corner, but he could kick my ass, okay? That's what a community used to look like. It's not that way anymore because we no longer teach members of our community who we are. Du Bois talked about the soul. Okay, what is that? A sense of community where we look out for each other. And where did we get that from? We learned it from our elders. Now, unfortunately, in many of our communities, our elders are being attacked and they don't feel comfortable in their homes. Well, guess what? We all have a collective duty to grab our young people, look them in the eye, and said, you have much too much to waste like this. Our kids are crying out to be loved. To be loved. They're crying out for someone to teach them who they are. And by the way, they're crying out to be able to see a path out of this ghetto. Absent that hope, they're going to keep on killing each other, raping, stealing, and they're going to make music about it too. Okay? We want to change it. We can't stay in this nice little safe space and have these conversations. We need to go into our neighborhoods and talk to our kids and tell them one thing: I love you. I love you. Questions? Uh-oh. Colleague.
So to go off of what you were just saying, and I've heard you talk about resistance before, what would you suggest that we, and I'm talking as this very large general we, can do to help the youth when the only way that you can combat ignorance and encourage self-actualization is through education, but the state government is trying to restrict our abilities to do that. So if we can't do it in school and the communities that we live in aren't necessarily receptive to everything that you were talking about just before, what else would you suggest for resistance?
Multiple things. First of all, The state has historically tried to keep people from doing what we're going to be doing. And guess what? The state constantly loses. What happens? Freedom schools, for example. What happens? Churches become places, centers for learning. What happens? Okay, the library becomes a space for learning. What happens? We've got this whole internet. We've got this whole social universe that we can do what? You got Threads, for God's sake, okay? You got Blue Sky, for God's sake. You got GroupMe, for God's sake, okay? All right? We can go on these spaces where our young people are living, okay? And say, hey, you are special. We can't, we look, I'm understand that well, what's his name? Muhammad said, I'm going to wait for the mountain to come to me. And guess what? Mountain wouldn't come. So Muhammad said, what? I guess I'm going to have to go to the mountain. We can't wait for our young people to come into our classrooms, into our universities, into our spaces, into our churches. Let's go where they're at. Where they're at? They're on social media. Okay? Let's go there. It won't cost you nothing. You're already there. All right? And interact with him. All right? Let him know that you care. All right? You will be amazed if you just touch one person. By the way, you all know about 7 degrees of separation? All you got to do is touch 7 people. And those 7 people will touch 7 people. And those 7 people will touch 7 people. And before you know it, every person will be touched. So let's stop complaining about what we ain't doing and what we can't do. And let's get busy. Boom. Questions?
I'm standing up here as a fear. And let me tell you where that fear comes from. You spoke about education. And most of us in here understand how the lack of and misguided education can drive a people into oblivion. With the emphasis being getting ready to be directed towards the Department of Education. That's my fear. What are they going to do with that? Can you give us some pointed things that we should look for that they're moving to get some people into oblivion?
One, you can't stop this train.
What?
You cannot stop this train. Okay? We are at a existential moment right now. Okay? You got forces of complacency that are trying to push the clock backwards. Guess what? Time does not go backwards, it goes forward. All they can do is delay it. 2, what happens every 2 years? Yeah, but what? Yeah, but what? Really? Every 2 years. Okay? So guess what? Those 10 million folks that did not vote in the last election, they've got going to have 2 years to bemoan the fact that they made a mistake. All right? So 1, we have the numbers. We have control. 2, you can't stop what's happening on the internet. Okay? You can't stop people from getting together. And guess what? You can't stop good teachers from teaching their kids. I'm familiar with a Marva Collins, an educator, who did what? She got students motivated to learn, to come to school 6 o'clock in the morning to learn. That's what a teacher does. Okay? You as taxpayers, we as taxpayers, guess what? We have power over our school boards. By the way, you're talking about what's happening in D.C. We need to deal with what's happening right here in Cincinnati and in our neighborhood schools. Okay? Are they teaching our kids? Okay? Are we going to PTA meetings? Are we going to the school board? Are we looking at the report cards of each of the schools? Are we insisting that our schools, the taxpaying dollars that we pay, that they are educating our kids? Are we doing that? If we're not doing that, then guess what? Then we are buying into the system. We have a lot of control. I got one more question.
Thank you for taking my question. And I'm eager to delve into your book, but somehow, not surprisingly, along the way, critical race theory has become a bad word. So how do we that are on this DE&I effort, I've had some difficult conversations with CEOs within Cincinnati on DE&I efforts. How do we combat the negative stereotype of critical race theory to turn it into a positive? We're always on the defense of critical race theory, much like being woke. They've turned being woke into a bad word. But it's critical race theory is just teaching the truth, as your book so indicates here. So how do we help to turn the narrative when we have conversations with executives, with our white counterparts who think that it is a negative? So help give us some points on how to combat that.
Well, first of all, let us be real. There are the individuals that I don't care what you say, what you do, they're not going to change what they want and what they feel. Not going to happen. I'm not going to have an argument with anybody about nothing, okay? I will have a conversation with anybody. And by the way, I will change what I think and how I think about things based upon a free conversation. And I will tell individuals, one, I believe in the United States, and I believe in the Constitution of the United States. The Constitution that says that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that we're all created equal and endowed by a creator with certain inalienable rights. And I will tell them that the First Amendment to the United States Constitution said that you will pass no laws that will restrict ideas and the press. Second Amendment, by the way, say you will not restrict the gun ownership. I find it interesting that we can ban guns, but we can't ban books. And so I would tell them, I will take my books off your guns if you take your guns off my books. One last question. Dr. Moffitt from the school board.
So you just said that. Thank you for putting a target on me. But
Yo!
so I
Get on the back,
you
yeah.
did just put a big target on me. So I sit at the table as an elected, and my question, and I took lots of notes. I think I find it much easier to engage young people and to ignite their spark than I do adults. Sometimes the adults are the problem more than the students. So my question is around, you have dealt with adults at Miami. How do we get to the adults that impact the young people? Because sometimes we're teaching not only the student, but we're teaching the parents as well. And so it's not, we don't teach civics, we don't teach about electorates, we don't teach about those things in classes anymore. But kids know what they need, and they know that they're not getting it at home. They also know that they need to get it at school. So how do we bring in and engage the adult, the young adult? I'm talking about like the 25-year-old to 30-something-year-old who think that they have it. They are on social media, but they're not listening. So if you could give us some foundational things on that, that'd be great.
Here's an interesting thing. I would start with, a philosopher said that people will act in their own best interest, rightly understood. I would start by talking about the cradle to prison pipeline. I would start talking about the number of inmates that we have in Ohio and all other states in the union. The prisons are packed. And I would ask them to please Tell me, how much does it cost to keep someone in jail on average for a year? They will tell you that's about $60,000 a year. And I will tell you, guess how much it costs to go to Miami University? It would be cheaper for you to send them to Miami University than to send them to jail. And when they graduate from Miami University, guess what? They will get a job and pay taxes. They can spend 5, 10 years in prison, and they will only learn how to become a better criminal. Which means that we've invested in crime. Oh, we used to try to rehabilitate prisoners. That's before a large number of blacks were in prison. Created a prison pipeline. And guess what? We need to go back to investing in rehabilitation. Punishment doesn't work. All that makes them is smarter and angrier. And by the way, look at your tax bill. You can keep paying for failing schools. You can keep paying for prisons. You can keep adding more and more security in your homes. And yet you won't feel any more secure. You can buy all the damn guns you want, okay? And then you might say something like this: you didn't get where you are by yourself. Somebody had to reach in there and pull you up. Somebody had to speak into your spirit. And we need you to speak into someone's spirit. Each of us can reach one of us. I would like to thank you very much.